What happens to a journalist who thinks outside the box? Doesn't limit himself to the narrative set by politics and the mainstream, but also investigates beyond it. According to Reporters Without Borders, in 2024 there will be 522 journalists in prison worldwide because of their work, more than ever before. In 2023 at least 57 media workers were killed. Although the numbers have increased, this massive approach against journalists in Western countries is outdated. Intimidation measures are not used so obviously. Here people tend to destroy the person in question economically or use psychological means. Not theoretically, but using a very specific case, we would like to show what can happen when an investigative journalist moves too far away from the mainstream and gets too close to the truth. Manuel Mitter's television career. Manuel Mitters, who lives in Vienna, helped set up the private broadcasters in Austria. His eventful career as an editor and reporter included the TV channels ATV, ProSieben, Sat1 Austria, Service TV, ORF, and ARTE. Until 2010 he was on the editorial team at Puls 4. However, after he wanted to uncover alternative topics, such as the contradictions surrounding the terrorist attacks of 9/11, he was let go. After that he worked for a short time as a sports presenter at Service TV. Since then he has been keeping himself afloat with welfare. His internet community supports him so that he can continue to carry out investigative work. Campus and Jutros in a street survey in the city center of Vienna, Mitters, as a freelance journalist, found that 2 out of 3 respondents had experience of child abuse in their immediate personal and family environment. This led him to take a closer look at Mark Jutros's child abuse ring in Belgium and the Campus kidnapping case in Austria. Surprising things came to the surface. In the Campus case, for example, he published an eyewitness report after, contrary to the official version, there were 2 kidnappers, instead of just 1. As a result, Mitters was ambushed in the street by 4 Chechens in mid-2020 and brutally beaten. Without it being provable, however, the temporal connection suggests that the research could be a motive for the crime. It seems as if Mitters had stirred up a hornet's nest with the results of his research. Investigations into pedophile cases, such as those of Campus and Jutros, often show that, contrary to the officially held lone perpetrator theory, there is actually a whole network behind it. Apparently, Mitters' publications on child abuse, pedophile networks, and satanic sacrifices have attracted the attention of influential personalities. Witness report and documents. On December 15, 2020, his apartment burned down completely. 3 other apartments became uninhabitable. According to the official fire report, a lithium battery in his laptop was responsible. However, he received an anonymous letter claiming responsibility, which suggested that perpetrators from Jutros's circle of friends might have been involved. It mentioned things about the fire that were not officially known. He was left with nothing, everything he owned had burned, and he had no insurance. All he had left was what he was wearing. Thanks to the many donations from his internet followers, he was able to get the bare necessities back. State arbitrariness. One would think that the state would be interested in someone in need being supported by third parties and not having to rely on public assistance. In this case, however, that is not the case. The Domestic Secret Service added up all the support given to Mitters back to 2017 and found that the monthly allowance had been exceeded. They did not miss here. It was the Secret Service and not, as one might think, the tax office or the public prosecutor's office. The Secret Service filed a complaint about the donations and linked him to right-wing extremist crimes. The allegations were made that had long since been dismissed by a court because they were not proven to be true. The fact that this is not really about the donation accusation is shown by the other measures used to harass Mitters. His electricity was cut off for days even though he had paid. His bank account was cancelled or letters were not delivered and sent back to the sender. 2 days before the hearing about the donations, 3 police officers visited him, demanding a fine from the time of the corona measures. If he had not been able to pay, he would have been put in coercive detention and his dog would have had to go to the animal shelter. Did he perhaps get too close to someone during his research who now wants to use this approach to prevent him from doing further research? Manuel Mitters is by no means an isolated case. There are other journalists and publicists besides him, as well as numerous people from other professions who have experienced enormous reprisals as part of their commitment to combating sexual and ritual violence. Some of them even died, and it is suspected that they were murdered because of their educational work.
Tilman Nechtel. The journalist Tilman Nechtel had reported on pedophilic and satanic crimes. Several of his YouTube channels were blocked and the distribution of the Swiss Expresseitung was banned in Germany, where he works as an editor. In order to discredit him, he is repeatedly branded as right-wing extremist and anti-Semitic, a well-known and proven media strategy to silence those who educate. Joe Conrad. Joe Conrad dealt with ritual and sexual abuse and child abduction by the authorities in his BWUSSD.TV shows. When he stood up for the affected family in a case of child abduction by the authorities, he was even taken to court. In this case, a boy and a girl were separated from their father. The boy then escaped from the home several times and reported to a judge the conditions under which he and his sister had to live. The children's intolerable living conditions were not investigated, but Joe Conrad was sentenced to 70 daily rates of €60 each because he reported on it and stood up for the family. Julian Assange. The well-known whistleblower not only exposed the war crimes of the US military, he also leaked emails between US presidential candidate Hillary Clinton and her campaign manager John Podesta, which fueled suspicions that Clinton and Podesta were involved in child sex trafficking. The scandal became known as Pizzagate. Assange was mercilessly persecuted for his revelations. He fled to the Ecuadorian embassy in London, where he found asylum for 7 years. In 2019, his right to asylum was withdrawn. He was arrested and held in the British high-security prison Belmarsh until 2024. He was threatened with extradition to the USA with the prospect of being sentenced to 175 years in prison for high treason. In 2024, he was surprisingly released on the condition that he plead guilty to espionage.
These examples are only representative of many more people who were subjected to reprisals and persecution because of their sense of justice. After the broadcast, other people are shown who were systematically terrorized because of their intelligence service. Several of them even died mysteriously. Networks in which children are abused and many other bad things are done can exist in this form because influential circles from politics, the judiciary, and the super-rich are involved. We have already reported on this several times in our programs. Scandal, Judiciary entangled in pedocriminal networks. www.kla.tv/28454, The Blood Sect 1, www.kla.tv/24000, and The Blood Sect 2, www.kla.tv/27211. Conclusion: Ursula v. der Leyen said at the World Economic Forum 2024 that they had to restore people's trust in politics. But that does not mean that these circles are interested in promoting the truth. Unpopular opinions are simply censored and no longer made accessible to the public, as happened, for example, with the deletion of several pages and channels on social media. The ban on Compact magazine by the German Interior Minister Nancy Faeser was also such an attempt. According to the current ruling of August 14, 2024, this ban was not tenable and was lifted pending a subsequent main hearing. But no one can say what deterrent effect such a measure will have and whether the presiding judge will soon face a house search or other reprisals. Investigative journalists, i.e. journalists who do what is expected of them, uncover filth, are often obstructed and persecuted, both by their employers in the media industry and by the authorities, the judiciary and criminal clans. Other investigative or personally affected investigators are also in the same situation. Isn't that unworthy of a democracy? And isn't there always talk of the media as the fourth power in the state, which should be the corrective and expose the evil machinations of a criminal self-appointed elite and its puppet masters? Dear viewer, please help us to make these connections public. This is the only way to prevent certain circles from simply continuing to violate both freedom of expression and investigative journalism are being suppressed with increasing brazenness.